So this review is going to be a bit different from the ones I normally do. Mainly because the story I'm reviewing has a lot of stuff that I want to talk about, a lot of stuff that I feel is really relevant to the overall quality of the story, but that I can't talk about without pretty much spoiling huge chunks of the story. As such, I'll spend the first half of this video giving a brief non-spoilery idea of what the story's about, and the second half will pretty much spoil the whole story, so be warned. Anyways, with that in mind, let's get on with the review. Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce G Senjou no Maou. G Senjou no Maou is a tale of conflict between the genius heroine Haru and the mastermind villain Maou. Throughout this story, they repeatedly clash in battles of wit, and we get to observe these classes through the eyes of the son of a powerful Yakuza boss. Sounds pretty cool, right? Well, yes, that bit is. Unfortunately, our protagonist, Kyosuke, still goes to school as well as doing mob work, and Haru is also a high school student. Hooray! Oh, and of course, because this is a visual novel, there are a whole bunch of female leads other than Haru. So along with the clashes between Haru and Maou, we also get some poor attempts at high school comedy, and the classic time for visual novel protagonist to fix all of the problems of visual novel heroine plots. As you can probably already see, I like some parts of the story a bit more than others. The player character, Kyosuke, is probably one of the best, if not the best, protagonists I've ever seen in a visual novel. Instead of trying to make him relatable to everyone, and hence having no personality whatsoever, or having "I am hero, I will do good" character, they instead made him a complete asshole. Well, actually that's a bit of an overstatement. He does have something of a conscience, but the writers certainly weren't afraid to have him do things that the reader would in no way agree with. He tends to be pragmatic, cold, and calculating, and while he isn't always likable, he is always interesting. Our lead heroine, Haru, is also a very well written character. She's quirky at times, awkward as hell at others, and absolutely hilarious. While she can often be pretty silly, as soon as she begins a clash with Maou, she becomes deadly serious, and her inner genius really shines. Other than Haru though, the other heroines aren't all that notable. We have Little Miss Perfect, kind, smart, sweet Tsubaki, Kennen, who is the female equivalent of a dumb jock, a ditzy diva maybe, and Shiratori, who only needs one word to describe her, tsundere. Lastly, I should probably give a mention to Kyosuke's adopted father, Gonzo. Like his son, he is cold and pragmatic, but he also has a marked lack of a conscience and can be downright brutal at times. That being said, he is never completely evil and fulfills the role of an amoral character quite nicely. The best part of this story is easily the main storyline following Haru and Maou. It's well paced, tense, and completely unpredictable, which makes it a pleasure to read. I also appreciate the fact that the story's focus is on things that aren't often discussed in visual novels. The whole mixing of the Yakuza turf wars, corporate corruption, and terrorism is pretty original in my experience with this medium. And it also compares favorably with similar stories outside the medium like Black Lagoon. My biggest non-spoilery problem with this story was that all the non-Haru heroines weren't really developed all that much. The most extreme example is Shiratori, who we scarcely even see until the 4th chapter, and even within the 4th chapter she doesn't do all that much other than the shy tsundere act early and then crying a bunch later. Tsubaki and Kennen are slightly better, but they don't exactly do much unless you enter their route, and once you pass their route, they virtually disappear from the game. It kind of feels like the developers wrote the story just based around Haru's route, and then after they finished said, "Hey, this is a visual novel, shouldn't we have more girls?" At which point they decided to add a couple random character tropes and tack on some stories for them. To be fair, I did actually enjoy Tsubaki's and to a lesser degree Kennen's route, but the way that they scarcely existed before their story route and vanished afterwards is just a bit unfortunate. Also, you'll note I'm not even deigning to comment on Shiratori's route. Another slightly smaller issue I had with the game was the music. It tended to either be very generic elevator music or very bad remixes of classical music. Kind of funny when the protagonist of this game is supposed to be a huge music buff. I'm pretty sure he would cringe if he listened to how they treated classical music in this game. So this is one of those odd cases where I'm pretty sure the VN is generally well done, but I can't say I enjoyed it necessarily as much as I think it's well written, which makes it difficult to evaluate. If you're really into visual novels, it's definitely worth a read, but otherwise it's only maybe. If you've already read the story and are looking for something similar, Grisai no Kujitsu is probably the closest thing I've come across in terms of visual novels. It starts out being way more slice-of-lifey than G Senjou, but once you get into the character roots, it becomes quite similar. Anyways, this ends the non-spoilery section of the review. If you're leaving now, thanks for listening. Okay, so I have a number of issues with this story that couldn't be addressed while avoiding spoilers. First and foremost is my issue with the endings. You see, if there's going to be some endings for a visual novel which requires more reading to get to than others, I'd kind of like it to be the ones that take longer to get to that are happier. G Senjou seems to take the exact opposite approach. We go from the first ending, where Kyosuke is living happily with Tsubaki, his mother's recovered, and everything is just peachy, and then things slowly go downhill until we get to the last ending, where hundreds of people have just been slaughtered. Both Kyosuke's real and adoptive father are dead, as is his mother, and Kyosuke's in jail for murder. Hooray! Admittedly, the last ending is slightly happier than all that, because we do get to see Kyosuke eventually getting released from jail and being greeted by his bastard child. But still, it kind of feels weird to do the whole bunch of extra reading just to see how much worse things can turn out. My second beef is with the choices in the game, because these choices don't just impact what happens later in the story. Oh no, they also impact what happens previously as well. A great example of this is in the 4th chapter, where Shiratori is taken hostage at the high school. If you let the police take care of it, then Shiratori is rescued safely from the high school without incident. If you instead wait for Takeda to do the negotiating, it's later revealed that Shiratori was never held in the school to begin with. So somehow your decision whether or not to call the police has a magical effect of going back in time and determining where Shiratori gets held hostage. Next, I'd like to talk just a bit about Maou. For the long period of time in the story, we get a charade of, maybe Kyosuke has a split personality and he's really Maou. Gasp. Maybe he isn't. Such drama. Honestly though, we get told right at the start of the story that Haru has been traveling around following Maou for a while, and we know that Kyosuke has stayed put since Gonzo adopted him. So this whole thing just turns into a, maybe this story has plot holes. Maybe this story doesn't have plot holes, and it just becomes a bit irritating. Incidentally, for those who don't know, Maou is actually Kyosuke's brother, Kohei. There's a number of issues with this though, which is that for all the routes other than Haru's, Kyohei, for some reason, gives up his evil master plan, is never seen from again after our main character falls in love. The only time we get something close to an explanation is in Canon's route, where Maou says he found love and was dissuaded from his plan. This makes sense if you're assuming that Kyosuke's Maou, as he's just fallen in love with Canon at that point in the story. But it makes no sense whatsoever for Kyohei. This feels like a bit of a massive plot hole. Continuing on the note of the plot holes, we also have this lovely scene where Gonzo sacrifices his life to save Kyosuke from Kyohei, which doesn't fit at all in his character. At no point in the story does he ever give any indication that he gives a rat's ass about anyone else's life other than his own, or that he has anything remotely resembling affection for his adopted son. If that was the writer's attempt at redeeming Gonzo, it was a pretty half-assed one. Anyways, as negative as I may have just been, I still think this is a decent free end. For those who stuck around till the end, thanks for listening, and I look forward to seeing your comments below. Cheers!